Hello everyone, I'm Grandmaster Erwin Lamy, and in this video I am planning to show you the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen played in the Gashimov Memorial. Before we start, it's interesting to note that games between Nakamura and Carlsen are always a very tense affair. They have a kind of social media war going on where they try to outsmart each other with tweets. But on the board, for the moment, Magnus has been leading pretty clearly with a +9 score, meaning that he won 9 games and they drew a few. I'm not sure how many exactly, but they drew a few games and Carlsen won 9. Hikaru actually never managed to beat Carlsen in a classical game. In a previous blog post on chesscity.com, I discussed the game they played in Zurich, in which Hikaru Nakamura was completely winning. And I also mentioned in that blog post that I felt that Hikaru was one of the few players that actually managed to get closer to Carlsen. And I felt that there was a turning point ahead. And, well, that turning point had to be this game. So let's go straight to it. Hikaru opened with d4. Carlsen didn't play anything that was very surprising. Went for his usual nimzo, bishop b4, and Hikaru once again played f3. And for the players who haven't seen that previous game between Nakamura and Carlsen, please don't forget to check that previous blog post, because that was a very, very interesting game as well. In that previous game between Carlsen and Nakamura, he also played f3. And in this particular game, Carlsen played c5. It's interesting to note that lately many top players have gone f3 against Carlsen, and they feel that this is kind of a weak spot. That's not so hard to imagine, because after d5, which he played in the previous games that he met this variation, he got into quite a lot of trouble. For example, against Anand in their World Championship match. After c5, c takes d5, he played the very rare move e takes d5. But after e3, c4, knight e2, well, it would be too much to go into this game in depth, but it transpired that it's quite a dubious system for white, and for black, I should say, and white quite easily managed to develop an initiative on the king side. Although it should be said that Magnus eventually managed to win this game. Against Nakamura, Magnus tried to deviate with the move bishop e7, and after e4, d takes e4, f takes e4, e5, d5, bishop c5. It's a system that has been seen many times before. Carlsen was having a very tough time. As I said, he was lost in this particular game, and that's why I also feel that Nakamura was ready to go for this line once again to see what Carlsen had prepared this time. And as last, it should be mentioned that in this tournament, the Gashimov Memorial, also Karyakin played the f3 line against Carlsen. And after short castle, a3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, once again Carlsen played something rather rare. Let's call it rare. I could also call it dubious, but rare is a more modest way of describing it. After knight h3, f5, Karyakin played the move e3, which is a bit modest, and maybe bishop g5, followed by a move like e4, for example. I'm not aware of the theoretical of the current state of theory in this particular line, but it seems that when you go f3, you have to be ready to push e4, and e3 seems a bit too restrained to me. And after d6, bishop e2, c5, black was completely fine. I'm sure that were Carlsen to repeat this variation, then Nakamura would have tried something like bishop g5, queen e8, and try to get an initiative here. But once again, Carlsen deviates from a game he played previously. played c5, d5, actually the most sharp and dynamic variation against the f3 line, e4, and d6. Bishop d2, a little bit of a rare move. The idea is quite simple though. After knight ge2, some people have been playing b5. And in this position, you would like to be able to take the pawn with the knight. As after c takes b5, I think it's the move a6 here, and it's after b takes a6, let's say e takes d5, e takes d5, bishop takes a6, rook is coming to e8, queen is, well, bishops are pretty strong, and the king, not to forget, is still in the center. So here black has quite a good composition. So bishop d2 is a very reasonable move. E takes d5 was played in a game by Aronian almost 10 years ago in Russia, the European Championship, against Evemenko. It was a very interesting game. After c takes d5, knight h5 was played, and I think this is very much in the spirit of the variation. Black would like to be able to play f5 because this center is looking really strong, and that's black should really aim at a direct dynamic attack on that center, because if white gets time to get his pieces out, then that center will really be very, very strong. At the moment, black's only compensation for not having occupied the center is the fact that he has some kind of advantage in development, and he has to try to make use of that as quickly as possible. Well, this game of Aronian is surely one that I would recommend to you to check. Aronian played the very interesting move g4, and after queen h4 check, king e2, knight g3 check, hg, queen takes h1, king f2. It was a very sharp game. I do feel it was a bit dubious what white was doing. For example, instead of the move knight d7, which was played in the game, maybe c4 could be an improvement, making way for the bishop to come to the long diagonal. But all in all, a very interesting game and very illustrative for what this variation is about. Carlsen chose knight bd7, knight ge2, normal development, knight e5, attacking c4, so knight g3 is a logical answer. E takes d5, c takes d5, and bishop d7. Now Carlsen, he was not very happy with this move bishop d7, but in general, I must say I kind of dislike black's position. As I said before, if black doesn't manage to get some quick counterplay, then white is simply going to play bishop e2, short castle. Then, having completed his development, white can think about playing f4 and start just an offensive on the king side. And it's not very clear to me what black has to oppose this plan. For example, c4 is a move instead of bishop d7, trying to meet bishop e2 with bishop c5, so that the king will be forced to stay in the center, at least for the moment. But white can simply reply with bishop e3. And after, let's say, queen c7, bishop e2, bishop c5, again trying somehow to get the bishop on the diagonal, white simply goes queen d2 very calmly. And it's not really clear what black has achieved there. Short castle will be coming. And after it, as I said, f4, and black's position may easily collapse. So I think that even in the fourth try that Carlsen had in this line, after his games against Anand, against Karyakin, and against, of course, the previous one against Nakamura, also in this game he failed to show us the right way to play against this variation. He seems to simply refuse to check this line properly. Let's go back to the game. Bishop d7 was met with a3, bishop a5, bishop e2, normal development, b5. Of course, black is trying to get his pawns rolling on the other side, create some kind of counterplay. Short castle, c4, bishop e3. White is following the scheme which we said. The queen will go to d2, and then the pawn will start rolling on to f4. Bishop b6, queen d2, rook b8. Also a move I didn't really like. I'm afraid I'm repeating myself too much, but as I said, we need to be fast with black. We need to. White is already fully mobilized, and f4 is on the cards. So, for example, a move that I would like already more is the move a5, trying somehow to get something going on the queen side. Although I don't really believe in it that much. For example, the move knight d1 could prove already more than enough, and after an exchange we would be able to take back with the knight, and those pawns, they may actually also become weak in the end. The computer suggestion is h5, and at first I thought, well, this is your typical computer nonsense. We all were taught from an early age that you don't play on the wing where you're supposed to be weaker, and of course in general black is weaker on the king side. But then when I tried to refute it, when I thought that I would simply play h3 here, but after h4, knight h1, black has knight g6. And if you get more time, you'll go knight h5, and you create some kind of blockade on the black squares. Then I realized that h5 is actually not that stupid. It's not so easy to meet this move for white. So it may have been an improvement. I am still a bit skeptical. I mean, this is, you know, computer at work, but it may not be as bad as it looks. And surely somewhere around here, black has to find an improvement, because rook b8, as Carlsen played in the game, it's simply too slow. White played knight d1, ready to bring his knight to e3 after an eventual exchange, and then maybe even to f5 or to g4. Bishop c8. Oh, this looks, of course, strange. And, well, basically, it's Carlsen admitting that this move bishop d7, with which he expressed already his dissatisfaction, that this was a mistake, and he is trying now to give the d7 square back to one of those knights. And well, in any case, it is clear that things have gone awfully wrong at this point. King h1 is a nice prophylactical move. Getting out of the diagonal will always prove useful. Knight fd7, and time for action. f4, knight g6, bishop takes b6. It's a good moment to take, because right now black is unable to take back with the queen because of f5, knight ge5. Now this would be a dream position for black. If he would be able to make another move, it would be a dream position for black. Let's say if he would also be able to play the other knight to f6, then he would have a perfect control, and black would really think of being better. But white is allowed to move first, as we all know. After black moves, white is allowed to move, and f6 is immediately crushing. The idea being knight takes f6, rook takes f6, g takes f6, knight h5, and with the queen entering on h6, the king is simply doomed. Mating attack. So queen takes b6 is not possible. That means that black has to take back with the rook, and after which Nakamura brought his knight to e3. Yeah, dream position for white. What can we say? Knight c5, threatening something small on b3. Nakamura makes use of this moment to reroute his bishop to c2. And this is a maneuver I quite like, because on c2 the bishop is also more likely to be actively involved in attack on the king. Knight d3. Well, this looks, of course, nice. Knight on d3, but at the moment it's the only thing that black can be happy about. And after f5, knight f4, it should be mentioned that knight e5 runs into a similar thing that we discussed before, the move f6, and that once again reminds black of that in chess the king is the most important piece. Knight f4 was played. a4. a4, this kind of moves are always nice to include. a4, a6, because now when white wants, he can open the a file after an exchange, and it will be actually white's decision always, and not black. So that's always a useful move to make. Knight g4 was played, obviously intending to take the knight on f4. And this is a difficult moment for black, because first of all, we should note what happens after queen g5. Because this seems to be protecting the knight on f4. And well, this meets a very beautiful refutation. The refutation is knight h5. Once again attacking the knight on f4. The knight cannot take on h5, obviously, because it would hang the queen. And if the queen takes on h5, then we have the discovered check, knight f6. And after g takes f6, bishop takes h5, knight takes h5. Black does have 3 pieces for the queen, but the problem is there immediately follows queen h6, followed by rook f3, and the mating attack actually continues. So I'll just make a few moves to illustrate that. For example, queen h6, let's say knight g7, because the knight is hanging, and f4, it will just be taken. So knight g7, rook f3, and well, rook is coming to g3, perhaps to h3, although we should look out for some knight checks, but it's hopeless. It's really awful, and so queen g5 is not possible. And Carlsen, of course, saw this and played h5, a move that we discussed earlier, but here it's being played under quite more desperate circumstances, and it gives Nakamura a very broad choice. He has the choice between rook takes f4 or simply retreating the knight, and he chose the later. Very interesting was the move rook takes f4. So now after knight takes f4, knight h6 check. That's a very nice move, because the immediate queen takes g4, h takes g4 is less clear, but after knight h6, g takes h6, queen takes f4, white has succeeded to seriously weaken the black king's position. So knight h6 is a very important move in this variation. And after queen g5, queen f2, very strong, hitting the rook on b6. Rook b7, knight takes h5, and this position is really dangerous for black. The immediate threat is rook a3, the rook coming to g3, and there's not an awful lot that black can do to oppose this. One simple variation is b takes a4, queen d4. As I said, rook a3 is also an interesting move to start with. F6, and now g3. That's a very pretty move, because if white would be allowed to make another move at this point, then the queen would get trapped with h4. So that's a very surprising resource that white has, simply trapping the queen on g5. And this actually forces black to give a piece in this position, but of course after e takes f5, queen a5, simply move like bishop e2. White has fantastic coordination. The rook will be coming to f1 soon. King is still weak permanently, actually. The knight might easily be rerouted to e6. All the pawns are weak. So this should simply be a technically winning position. So rook takes f4 was definitely a very strong move. I also checked the move h takes g4. You can check these lines further in the blog post itself. I would refer you there at this point. What Nakamura did, knight f2, I cannot say there was anything wrong with this, just keeping control. Personally, I prefer rook takes f4, but objectively speaking, I don't think that he is ruining much with the move that he chose. Carlsen played queen f6. Yeah, the problem is that, again, to point out this resource, after h4, knight takes g3, knight takes g3, white has a very strong intermediate move f6. So he doesn't have to retreat his knight, because here it's simply typical mate as usual. Black can give one more check, but after taking, white is just in time. It's always nice to give a mate. So queen f6 was played. Knight takes d3. Yeah, and this is perhaps a moment in the game that things start to turn. In this position, a very simple way of playing was simply knight takes h5. And after knight takes h5, knight takes d3, c takes d3. Here bishop takes h5 would be not so clear, because after b takes a4, black gets counterplay on b2. But white has again a very strong intermediate move in this position, and that's the move a5. So before taking the knight on h5, white first attacks the rook, and therefore keeps the b file closed. And after rook b7, bishop takes h5, well, the d3 pawn will fall, and white is already a pawn up at this point. For example, queen d4. I'll just show you a nice way. Bishop e2, very strong, making use of the pin of the pawn. Queen takes e4, bishop takes d3, and here queen takes d5 is bad, because again f6 not only threatening bishop h7 check, winning the queen, but after g6 we have again the move queen h6, highlighting the position of the king. So this was an important moment, because after knight takes d3, knight takes d3, knight takes h5, oh, sorry, queen e3, rook b7, knight takes h5, things started to get messy. But before I continue with that, I wanted to point out the point behind queen e3. The point is, after, if white would start with knight takes h5, then queen takes b2, queen g5, queen e5, is actually not clear at all. White is not able to increase the pressure, because the queen is pinned. So Nakamura played queen e3 first, attacking the rook on b6, and now after knight takes h5, if black were to take on b2, then we simply go f6. So the point is that black is no longer attacking the queen on d2, which means that white has an extra move for the attack, and now it's really crashing through. Let's just see that. Well, I hardly see a move, but let's say queen e5, at least preventing queen g5 for the moment. But now I guess f takes g7 is the easiest way to continue. And with the knight coming to f6, queen coming to h6, it will probably not last very, very long here. So Carlsen chose queen h6, and queen takes h6 was played, and that's logical, because queen d4, b takes a4 is not that clear. Black will get counterplay on b2, and white's attack has somehow diminished a little bit, so I don't think this is that clear. This line does illustrate, though, that in this particular position, it would have made a lot of sense to include the move a takes b5. Because after a takes b5, knight takes h5, queen h6, now the same move, queen d4, cannot be met with b takes a4. Which basically means that white has a huge advantage in this position. So definitely that move a takes b5 was worth considering. And suddenly we get this endgame. So kind of a big transformation. And I'm sure that at this point Carlsen was quite relieved. I mean, he must have realized that his position is still bad, but without queens, at least there will be no mate. And with those queenside pawns, the majority on the on the queen side, black actually has some potential in his position. The game continued bishop c2, and it's an interesting moment. Carlsen played knight e5 more or less without thought, but it seems that knight takes b2 was entirely possible. I understand that rook a3, b4, rook g3 check, king h8, knight f6, it must have been looking very scary. For example, rook f4, rook h4 is a big threat here. But in reality, after, say, rook a7, simply making sure that either rook a1 or rook a3 becomes available, it's actually not clear at all how white should proceed here. So knight takes b2 was a very possible move, and after knight e5, white gets the chance to really launch, to get a big initiative in this endgame, but not by rook a6. I felt that b4 is the right move here. Before I show that, I should first show that the most natural move, king g1. In the endgame, we always want to have our king in the center where it can play an active role. b4, king f2, b3, bishop b1. Black has a very strong move, rook b6. Preparing rook a6, exchanging the rooks. And now after rook c8, king d4, king f8, the position is quite unclear. The bishop on b1 is completely buried. The extra pawn on the king side doesn't play much of a role. Actually, it more or less hinders white's bishop from moving at all. And I don't think that black has an advantage to speak of here. What I like much more is the move b4. This pawn has to be taken by black, because otherwise white has succeeded in stopping that majority from running. So black has to take the pawn. And after bishop takes b3, rook b6, well, there are other moves, but king g1, b4, rook f c1. I just wanted to illustrate this is a kind of ideal setup, I believe, for white, and I think that it has white really has a huge advantage here. There is total control, basically. This move b4 is a nice move, I think. After rook a6, rook d8, knight g3. White went astray, meaning that this maneuver knight e2, knight d4, it's really not bringing much. And it's interesting to see how Carlsen makes use of the opportunities that he will now be getting. Rook b8 is the first move he started with, attacking the rook on a6. And also in the future, after bishop d7, which will come in this position, now the rooks are connected, which means that black can also fight for the a file. Note that also the pawns are very serious at this point, and as I mentioned, things have turned around. Black is fully mobilized, ready to push his pawns, and actually his majority on the queen side is now much stronger than the white's pawn majority on the king side. Rook a1. Well, it's interesting to see that now, for example, the move knight d4 to finish the maneuver is met with rook a8, rook fa1, rook takes a7, rook takes a7, b3, bishop b1, and rook c8. And it's a great example of how strong black's counterplay is. Knight e2 would temporarily manage to block black's pawns, but after bishop e8, sorry, knight c3, knight d3, the pawn on b2 is hanging. At the same time, white cannot take on d3 because after rook a1, rook takes c3. Nice little tactic. B takes c3, b2. Well, it's no surprise that those pawns, they will be running, especially when they are helped by a very strong rook. For example, rook b1, d2, and bishop a4 is next. Just a sample to illustrate how things have gone wrong for white in this position. It's really an amazing transformation that took place, and at this point after bishop b5, there's already it's huge trouble basically. I haven't been able to find a clear way here for white in order to equalize. h3, rook dc8. Again, very strong move, preparing c3. And it should be noted that Hikaru was in severe time trouble at this point, and that also surely mustn't have helped in this position. King h2 he played, made a sort of neutral move in time trouble, but after c3, knight d4, c takes b2, rook b1, rook c4, very strong, highlighting the fact that white's pieces are vulnerable. Knight takes b5, rook takes c2. Black is now completely winning. The immediate threat is knight f3, knight d2. Another immediate threat is, of course, to take the rook on b5. Knight d4 was played. Knight takes d6. The immediate knight f3 is probably possible, followed by knight d2. But I think rook d8 is more is the move I would choose, not giving any kind of counterplay. After the knight moves, then knight f3, king g3, knight d2, and well, the rook has to go, and the pawn will queen. Knight d4 was played by Nakamura, and now we get another interesting moment, and one that when I was following this game, I thought that the next move would be b3, and that we would basically see a resignation here, because obviously after knight takes c2, b takes c2, at least one of those pawns will be queening, and there's not much of an alternative. So I was very surprised it didn't happen. In the press conference, both players reacted a bit surprised when they were asked about this move b3, and I remember Nakamura proposing the move knight c6, but then after knight f3 check, king g3, knight d2, white is allowed to take the rook on b8, but if the knight takes b1, followed by knight d2 and b1 queen, it will be quite easy. So I was a bit surprised not to see this on the board. On the other hand, as Carlsen said, he felt the rook endgame, which will be appearing, which could have appeared on the board, was an easy win. Still, I feel that not playing b3 is actually a big mistake, because in the game, white got some fighting chances, and if you have a chance to finish the game immediately, you should, of course, immediately grab such opportunities. Rook d2, he played in the game. Knight c6, rook e8, rook a4. Now, in the blog post that I have uploaded, I have analyzed knight takes e5, rook takes e5, rook a2 quite extensively. The conclusion eventually being that rook takes e4, rook takes b2, rook takes b2, rook takes b2, king g7. The endgame, as Carlsen said, is winning for black. The main reason is the very strong pawn on b4 and the very strong rook on e4, while white's forces are somewhat inactive. Not to mention that black's king will soon be having a very active role too. For more details, you can check the blog post for the concrete lines, but in general, the endgame is a pretty easy and straightforward win. Hikaru chose rook a4, but after knight d3, knight takes b4, knight f2, very precise. The knight is on its way to d1, rook a2, knight d1, there it is. Well, black is ready to take on e4, bring the rook to e2 afterwards. It's pretty much hopeless. Hikaru gave the rook on d1, the exchange I should say, but after rook takes e4, knight c6, king g7, f6, king takes f6, check, king g6, knight d8, rook e8. He eventually resigned because knight takes f7 can be met with rook f8. Oh, I shouldn't be blundering anything. Sorry, I almost made a blunder at the end of this video. Rook f8 can still be met with knight e5 check, but I guess that more simple is simply rook takes d5, still keeping that knight incarcerated, and black is in no hurry to pick it up. For example, king g7, rook f8 might follow next, winning the knight and the game. In general, this endgame with an exchange down is of course completely lost. So another classic chapter in the book of games between Nakamura and Carlsen. Very much a emotional game with ups and downs. Typical for these two. I'm already looking forward to the next game they will play. I keep saying that I have the feeling, as you could also see in this game, that Nakamura win is close, but on the other hand, you have to wonder how much can someone take, having had this completely winning position against Magnus in Zurich. Now again having an overwhelming position in this game and losing it in the end must be very painful. So I'm very curious how Nakamura will handle this, and looking forward to the next game. I'm not sure they will play Norway chess, but I'm sure anyway in the next few years we will be seeing plenty of games between these two. Now I hope you've enjoyed this video, and in general the video series I did on Carlsen's tournament victory in the Gashimov Memorial. If you have any questions, remarks whatsoever, let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, don't forget to work on your chess on chesscity.com. Great exercises, endgames, visualization, anything you can train on chesscity.com. So please check that out. For the moment, I'm out. Thank you. Bye.